and welcome. We are back with our Survive and Thrive podcast. And the whole premise of this podcast is to talk about eating disorders, body image, well-being, disordered eating, any kinds of format that takes, and try and just, I wouldn't say normalize it, but get the conversation going. And I think one of the best things we can do when we get the conversation going is be able to understand that not one size fits all, no pun intended. So that's why we have an amazing and very special guest each week, and I am delighted that this is Emma Guns. Emma, I was going to do my own blurb on you, but I found the most amazing bio and description, so I'm just going to read it because it's fantastic. So, Emma, no, hang on, actually, Emma Gunavardhana.
Gunavardhana, yeah, that's why I'm Emma Guns. Everyone calls me Guns, and it was too long for Instagram, so I was Emma Guns. So yeah,
I was like, organs blazing, and then I found out that was your last name, and I was like, I think I understand why we've gone for the shortened version. I'm Outen, so like if you're not Northern, I'm called like Outen, Orton, and I'm like, no, it's Outen.
Outen.
I should just be Gemma Oates, shouldn't I? Sorry, I digress. So Emma Guns, lovely Emma Guns, is an award-winning beauty journalist and podcaster, writing for a number of magazines and newspapers. Emma has contributed to Red, and we'll get onto that in a minute because I just read your article the other day, amazing. The Sunday Times Style, The Telegraph, Women's Health and Stylist. She hosts the UK's top-rated beauty podcast on Apple Podcast, The Emma Guns Show, covering topics including beauty, health, wellness, mental health, eating disorders, business, entrepreneurship, and finance. Emma prides herself on covering a variety of topics in a way that will be relevant and meaningful to her global audience, yes, and add value to anyone listening who may be curious about how to become, this bit I love, the best version of themselves.
Aww.
And I am all about that. So thank you so much. Like, I know how busy you are, and normally there's kind of like a staple sort of Q&A, but actually when I've been reading your amazing article on Red, and also you did a fantastic, just really brave and bold Instagram post about your experience with your breast reduction, and you did a post a year on, I didn't feel like I could go down the generic Q&A style thing that I had, because your story is very different to previous guests that we've had on, and that's something that I feel is really important, because I think with eating disorders especially, there's sometimes this whole thing of like what you should have experienced and how it should have manifested itself, and what should have been the trigger, and what's your outcome of recovery. And actually with you it's totally different, and I think that's brilliant. So I guess the best place for me to start is just what was like Emma like as a young girl, because one of the things that stuck out for me in your writing was how your experience is very different in the terms of weight, because you were obese and had a lot of issues. Well, not obese, but you deemed yourself as obese. I wouldn't know if you were or not. You know what I'm trying to say, don't you?
I do know what you're trying to say, yeah.
And that kind of like mapped out your relationship with yourself. But I guess just going back to sort of the younger years, like, how did you feel? Did you feel like you stood out? Was there anything that was said or done, or how would you describe Emma as a young girl, I suppose?
I feel as though when I think about my childhood, it definitely feels like before and after fat, because the narrative before, I gained weight when I was about 8 years old.
Right.
And before that, I was quite dull-like, and there were just constant references. And I'm in a way, I'm really glad I put on weight, because I clearly would have grown up to be an absolute brat. But a lot of the, like, it was always like my mother would dress me up, and I really remember being flattered and complimented a lot.
Yeah.
And, oh, isn't she lovely? All of these things. And then it just stopped. And so it was really obvious that it stopped at the time when the conversation went from, isn't she lovely? Isn't she such a sweet, dinky little thing? She's so great, to, does she need to go on a diet? Kind of thing. It was that shift. So, the worst thing about that in many ways is that you realize how the world treats you differently based on how you look, and learning that at 8 years old, I guess. And these are only things you realize when you're older.
Yeah.
You can't process them, compute them, or really understand them when they're happening. But I would say that, yeah, you just come to learn that how you look impacts how people treat you, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah. And a lot of it is in hindsight, isn't it? And like at the time, how do you process that at 8 years old? Like, and it's interesting because I was kind of the flip of you, because I was the one that everyone called a boy. I used to get called Jim when I was introduced as Jem. I looked very, I looked like a little boy, and nobody batted an eyelid in terms of looking at me in a pretty girl way. I was never the girl in pigtails, but then it switched when I kind of got my hair cut and it started to go like into a girly hairstyle, and then God forbid I wore a gingham dress to school one day, and that's where it changed for me. But I guess, how did it make you feel like, and as you say, a lot of this conversation as it is as adults is in hindsight, but how did it make you feel back then when that attention stopped? Like you said something interesting there, that you were relieved, you were glad.
Yeah, in a way. I also developed PCOS, so that's polycystic ovarian syndrome. So that's like a corrupt endocrine system. And my particular version of that, because everyone is different, and about 1 in 5 women actually have the condition.
Right.
But I had elevated testosterone levels. So not only had I put on weight at the age of 8, but around 11, 12, when I started to hit puberty, I got really bad facial hair.
Right.
I had alopecia. I got really bad acne. I had a lot of weight gain. I was incredibly tired. I was like a sloth. So there was a lot going on, essentially. But sorry, your question about that was, because I went off completely onto my tangent about PCOS. But I'm glad it happened. And my mother and I had this conversation a little while ago, and she said, in many ways, you would have been potentially quite awful because you could have traded off your looks. And unfortunately for you, you had to develop a personality, and you've actually been through something. And I think that you've come out the other side a better version of the person you would have been had it not happened.
That's really lovely. And I guess, did your mum sort of guide you through like the changes that were happening? So obviously you must have had to have gone to the doctor quite early, and have all these diagnoses, which is a lot to deal with when you're going through puberty.
Well, I went to the doctor when I was 8. My mom took me to the doctor when I started to gain weight, and it was a female doctor. So this really surprises me, but she said she's clearly eating too much, so she must be hiding her eating from you. And I remember being given like an A4 printout of exercises and being sent away with that.
Wow.
And so inevitably my parents, who were doing the best that they can do,
Of course,
just said, oh, maybe you shouldn't have the chocolate bar that you and your brother have after dinner, and you probably shouldn't have those crisps. And so that dialogue, that tone became, whereas my brother was being encouraged to neck a pint of milk before dinner because he was quite skinny. And so I definitely from then developed an odd relationship with food, because I understood that there was something bad about eating certain types of food, and that certain foods were restricted. And it wasn't until I was actually 17 that I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So you're talking about probably 10 years of putting on weight, not understanding necessarily why the weight was going on, but some of it was hormonal, some of it absolutely wasn't. Some of it was because I was eating in a way that meant I would put on weight. I was taking on more calories than I was burning off. But the real mess was the invisible one in my head about how I should be around food and what food really meant. And that, I think, is something that was so damaging.
And was there ever like, because this is the thing, like when I've sort of, again, just by reading and watching, and obviously we've spoken briefly, before, but this is the thing that I find really interesting, if you don't mind me saying, about your journey, in that it doesn't feel like, so a lot of people, how do I put this? A lot of people that I've spoken to with lived experience categorically know that they had either anorexia or bulimia or body dysmorphia speaking to you and reading what I've read, it doesn't feel like you ever knew that this was a disordered eating or an eating disorder. It feels like this has been quite a recent discovery, that actually for all of those years, am I right, or am I putting words?
You are so 100% right that it's been a really bizarre thing to realize.
Yeah.
I mean, when I really think the penny dropped, dare I say, I was 41.
Wow.
And yeah, I would never have said I have an eating disorder. I used to try to say to people, I think I'm addicted to food.
Right.
And if anyone who is listening to this has ever said that to somebody and said, I can't be around a buffet, or if I go into a shop, I just lose control. And the best analogy you can come up with, or the best comparison you can come up with, is addiction. 9 times out of 10, or actually 99 times out of 100, people will just kind of go, huh, and not really know what to say. So I had a sense that it wasn't right, but I certainly didn't think it was an eating disorder, because it doesn't sit at either extreme. It sits in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was living with a friend. I was between flats, and she very kindly said, "Oh, you come and live with me and my husband and the kids." And I was and she did say to me, actually, before I moved in, "You're going to lose weight when you live with me," because I barely eat. And it was a funny thing anyway. And I remember eating once, and we finished a meal, and I remember her husband saying something like, "You don't have a problem with food, Emma, you're just greedy." And I was heartbroken, because I thought, oh, he's seen through me. I haven't had a shield to protect myself, because I live with them. And so I thought I'd slipped into this behavior, and he'd been able to see that I was greedy. And that's what I find so nefarious about the binge eating disorder, or overeating, having issues with overeating, is that it can very easily be dismissed as you're just greedy, or you're just not doing the right thing for yourself. But you don't understand the mental anguish that that person feels because of what they're doing. And even if you're we could go on for hours about this, but up until 41, I couldn't have food in the house, because I didn't trust myself around it. So every time I wanted to go and eat, every time I wanted to eat, I would go and buy something. So I'd be in the supermarket 2-3 times a day, and I'd buy my meals as and when I needed them. I could not have food in the house.
Because you'd worry that you'd eat it all.
And I probably would.
Yeah. Do you know what? Like, I am so, I know we're not finished yet. I'm just going to say it. Like, I'm just so grateful that you're talking like this, because one thing that I found in all of this, and it's the one thing that really I think is so damaging when it comes to a dialogue around eating disorders and disordered eating, is we don't ever address this category. And I am forever saying that you can't treat everybody with the same diagnosis. And also, like, look, I had anorexia, and I know that I have posted photos that I've never posted ones that have been where I've been so low that I was on death's door, but I do know that I've posted ones to show the detrimental signs and impact of what an eating disorder does should it not be addressed early. But I always say when I post on social media that there isn't just anorexia, and it's not just about weight. And what's interesting is it's only been the last year that I've actually said my anorexia went into bulimia, and my bulimia went into binge eating anorexia. I've never said that. And you know why? Because I have felt so guilty because of the way I've been treated in eating disorder units by other people. The shame, like, it feels like it's more acceptable to like, oh no, I can't eat because I'm anorexic, or the bulimia, than it is, well, naturally not the bulimia at all. It feels more acceptable for people to talk about anorexia, and it's really, really such a damaging narrative, because I was probably more scared and sad when I was going through the bulimia and the binge eating anorexia type, because I felt even more isolated because nobody was talking about it. And also, you were made to feel disgusting. So sorry, that was just me going off on a tangent. Just like,
no, I appreciate it.
What's made you like start being open like about it? You know, what was it that's made you brave enough to, because it is brave from my point of view. You might not see it as
thank
that,
you.
but I think it is.
Thank
to
you.
actually go, this is what it is, and this is why we need to talk about it.
I spoke about it. I mean, as you mentioned, I posted a video on my Instagram, and it was a year after my breast reduction surgery.
Yeah.
And I felt enough time had passed between the events, and I had sustained my results, if you like, for long enough.
Yeah.
So that I could speak about it and A, be convinced that I was telling the truth, and B, also for people watching it, they could see, well, she's not just it's not like, do you remember back in the 90s, Oprah reached her goal weight on the Oprah Winfrey show, did the jeans up, and then years later said, I could not get those jeans on the next day.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. I always try with my content, with anything that I talk about, I always try to have lived it for a while before I share, because that's how you add how you add what's useful.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do an update about my breast reduction surgery, because a lot of women had messaged me when I had said that I'd done it. And so there was a big conversation, and people had asked me lots of questions. And I felt like I couldn't address my surgery without talking about what happened afterwards, because the truth is, the reason why I had breast reduction surgery, whilst I did have disproportionately large breasts for my body, I thought that if I had them reduced, I would look slim. And it was an absolute gut punch to basically get the surgery, have the perfect breast that I'd always wanted and paid handsomely for, and then actually see in clarity the rest of my body, and realize this had nothing to do with my breast. There's like 5% to do with actually fixing, I won't go into it, but my boobs could have done with a lift and a reduction. Let's just put it that way. But to be confronted with the fact that, oh, and now your bum looks bigger, now your gut looks even bigger, and all of this is tight and toned and up there, and everything else is kind of saggy and baggy and down there. And there were a few, I said this in the IGTV, but there are a few things that happened. So I had the surgery. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, even though it did very, very much did what it was supposed to do. And the surgeon did great work. But I then recovered. And while I was recovering, I was recovering by myself. And so I needed to be really responsible about lifting things, which sounds really silly, but so I couldn't go shopping. And so I had pre-ordered, well, I tell you how organized I was. And this goes to show how messed up I was. 2 days before my surgery, I hadn't told anyone, because I knew if I told my family that they would try to talk me out of it.
You didn't tell anyone you were having the surgery?
And I was having it. So 2 days before, I ordered 30 protein bars on Amazon, and I lined them up in the kitchen where I could reach them so I wouldn't lift my arms. And I thought, well, that's 10 days food. Isn't that absolutely mental? Like, I'm laughing, but it isn't funny.
Yeah.
But once I got home, and actually I didn't feel too bad, my friend Ian Haste has this brilliant cookbook called The 7-Day Basket, and I dabbled in it, but I thought, actually, this is perfect, because I can do an online shop, basically go to the one page, order everything, and then I've got my food for a week, 2 weeks, because every portion serves 2 people. And the food is really nourishing. It's really well balanced. There's lots of greens. And I just, in that recovery, made the connection between, and again, it sounds like really, you took you to 41 to realize this, but when your relationship with food is messed up, to sort of put it in a blanket term, you don't always get it. And actually being slow, having to rest, not being able to rush around, and actually enjoying my food, and realizing how those meals made me feel, it just joined the dots. Whatever had been broken or disconnected, or whatever wire circuitry wasn't connected, just connected. And now even the other night, I'm hormonal at the moment. I thought, oh God, I really fancy like something a bit bready, a bit chocolatey. I just fancied that. And I thought, no, actually, you've got your lower body workout tomorrow morning. You need some really good protein. Like, I now think like that.
See, this is why, like, the format of what the podcast has been like a part one of pre of like the early years and going through the eating disorder, and then part two of what's the recovery. And this is why actually this is really good for me, because I can't do this podcast like that. Do you know what I mean? And because I find it really sad from a personal point of view that you went through all of that and never realized that you were going through something that was a mental health illness and you needed help and support for. This is just, so I can't ask the questions like, oh, you know, when you were in hospital, or when you were in therapy, or when you weren't well enough to go on holiday, like, do you feel like you missed out on lots of years like that? But and then like, how did you shift? Am I explaining myself? I feel like I'm rambling, but I just can't. And this is what I love about the Green Speak to Us, because it's so different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it does make sense. I haven't listened to a ton of other people's stories, and I also feel like I don't hear about binge eating or binge eating disorder a lot. So my only real reference of anorexia and bulimia is like the Hallmark movies that I watched in the 90s with the girl who then went on to be the Pink Power Ranger, who was a gymnast. I mean, that's literally my reference for what bulimia looks like. So I mean, you asked about how it affected. I know that because I've seen your original questions, and I say it in the IGTV video. I lived half a life.
Okay.
I didn't think that normal things were for me.
Yeah.
And I remember when my first boyfriend dumped me at university, the first words that fell out of my mouth, I didn't even think them. They happened without me. You know, when you say something and you try to sort of shove it back into your mouth, you go, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. The first words I said were, is it because I'm fat?
Yeah. And this is why, like, it's such an eye-opener for many. It will be such an eye-opener for many people, because people think, and you know what, not shame on me, but shame on me for sort of like doing a set of questions like that, actually, because I've now learned that that's not the way it goes, because you've just expressed it eloquently there rather than me rambling on. And again, this is because I'm just learning so much, so sorry, forgive me. But I have done like a concept of, in my head, that these are the things that you miss out on because physically you aren't well enough to do that, right? Whereas actually you've just said to me, you still missed out on things, but physically you might have been deemed okay and able to do because perceptions on the outside looking in made it so. But actually, what's the one thing that I spout on about all the time? Being a prisoner in your mind. And you've just said that, and that's exactly why, you know, the binge eating and the perception of scales and weight and all of that, it doesn't matter, because what's going on is that you are so sad and so locked away by your perceptions of yourself. So I apologize, like, actually, for giving you those questions.
Please don't. We're all learning.
Thank you, because you know, this is what we're learning. I think in terms of like you saying, is it because I'm fat? Was that always the connection that you felt with everything? Like that there was going to be things that would fail because of the way you looked?
Yeah.
Wow. And that was just completely like a normal given to you, I guess, because nobody would have thought to challenge it, and you wouldn't have thought to challenge it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was one of those things where I really didn't want people to see me.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it really tiring if you are in a body that you don't feel comfortable in. And I always say, and it's so unique for everybody. So if you're listening, like, everybody's emotional filter, like, it's like having your own unique Instagram filter about how you perceive all of this or understand all of this.
Yeah.
So my own personal filter was that it was something that was bad about me. It was something that was wrong about me, but it was also something I was doing to myself, because on some level, I like, I've been a beauty writer for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And when you ask me, and when it comes to my approach to beauty, and this is relevant because you'll understand, when it comes to my approach to beauty, I follow the science. So you're not going to hear me wang on about flower essential oils and flower extracts. You're going to hear me talk about hyaluronic acid and vitamin C and retinol and double-blind clinical trials, and because show me evidence. And I feel the and actually I don't know whether this is helpful or not, but that's actually really helped me in this journey of recovery, in that I follow the science. Like it's it's thermogenics, isn't it? I
Yeah.
do, I know some people disagree with it, but for me, following the science and just going, right, well, beforehand, you were eating in this way where nothing was connected. Not just the calorie content of what you were eating, but how it was making you feel, why you were eating it. None of those things were connected. But fundamentally, if my goal was to lose weight, and it was, because I felt so embarrassed in my own skin, I was so rude. Just before, one of the other sort of things that happened was 6 weeks after my recovery, I had my picture taken with Elizabeth Hurley because she came on my podcast, and it was a live podcast. It was recorded at Estee Lauder Companies for their big breast cancer awareness campaign.
Yeah.
And even though I'd had my breast reduction surgery, you're standing next to Elizabeth Hurley and people are taking pictures, and somebody took a picture of me, and I'd say it was from a very unflattering angle anyway, but it was the picture that broke everything. And I just, for the first time in a long time, I cried my heart out. I was so unhappy that that's what people had seen that day. There's me hosting a podcast for a massive company with an international star, and I'm embarrassed that I'm on that stage because of how I look. Because I don't think I look like a successful podcaster. I think I look like a mess. And I'm literally disgusted with myself. And that was the kind of the final thing that made me, I'm really glad that was post breast reduction surgery after using Ian's book. That was the thing that made me say, well, clearly diet and exercise don't work, because you're really good at those and they work, but you can't sustain it.
Yeah.
And it really became clear to me that it has to be about living every single day without the pressure of a diet, without the pressure of exercise, living in a way that's going to make you feel good.
Yeah.
And so again, follow the science. And I did count calories to begin with. And that allowed me to understand portion control.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to understand what was a reasonable amount of food
Yeah.
for me to be eating. And I don't think it was unhealthy. However, I also know that if someone's listening to this and they have had anorexia, they will hear this and they will start thinking about they'll start thinking I'm talking about restriction. I benefit from restriction and discipline around food.
Yeah.
But I completely understand that for somebody, I had a really beautiful letter from a listener because I was talking about intermittent fasting. I really like it, mainly because my gut loves it and I sleep better if I intermittent fast, if I only eat between 12 and 8 p.m. And she said, but you have to understand that everything that you said, they're all trigger words for me. And I completely appreciate that. But I do personally benefit from discipline around food, because if I don't have that discipline, I've lived 40 years of not being happy in my own skin because I wasn't consuming food in a way that was healthy for me or made me feel good.
I don't think I get I get what you're saying. Like it's so tricky to talk about these things and then know what is right and what is wrong. But actually there's no right or wrong. And you put your head above the parapet and you're going to get shot sometimes. Like, but at least you're putting your head above and saying you're speaking out to thousands of not just women, men, kids. Eating disorders don't discriminate, as we know, like anybody out there. And I think it's really important that, yes, we do. I know that for some people, like you say, calorie counting is not the one. I don't do it, and I try not to get weird still. I mean, obviously I'm recovered, but I'm now in the recovery after the recovery, I think. So like, let's be honest, like there's no point in me saying, oh, look at me, like I'm wonderful and normal and well. Like, what's normal? That's bull.
Yeah.
So that don't work for me. But however, if I was back in that because I've been there, if I was back in that moment of bulimia and binge eating, I think that would have definitely helped me, and it did in many ways, look at, well, what is that doing for me? it's not doing anything but hurting me, you know. So I do think it's allowed and it's relevant, and I appreciate that. But there might be people watching, you know, who will be going, oh, but this is about your story and your experience and your experience around binge eating and what worked for you. It's not about you know, anorexia. It's not. We've just got to be really brave and clear that everybody's different, and this is the point of why we're talking.
Yeah.
And recovery is different for everyone, and treatment is different for everyone, and that's why sending somebody on a wait list and not giving them any treatment at all, but then just telling them to eat and to get on with it doesn't help. Like, this is showing like how diverse, how difficult and diverse and whatever all eating disorders are, because you're still the person. Like, you're not just like, oh, you were anorexic, oh, you are bulimic, oh, you were this. It's like, you are Emma and you had a binge eating disorder or disordered eating, and you had this, but you're Emma.
Mm.
You
I
know?
think as well, like, you can listen, there's so much out there, isn't there? I mean, I have I feel oddly about body positivity and body acceptance.
Yeah.
Because a few years ago I was talking to my friend and she said, oh, I never weigh myself. That's the worst thing that you can do. It's not a number that's accurate about X, Y, and Z. And so I didn't for a long time.
Yeah.
But for me, that was validating me sitting in denial. For somebody else, it would be doing something really positive.
Yeah.
So actually, for me, the day that I got on the scales, which was the day after the Elizabeth Hurley picture, was the first day of me facing up to what I was doing. And that number was incredibly helpful. And I had Gillian Michaels on my podcast recently, and she said, you've just got to view the number on the scale as a compass. It just tells you where you are.
Right.
And that's really quite benign, I think.
Yeah.
It's then up to you what you do with that information.
Yeah.
But just to let you know where you are. And when I got on the scale the day after the Elizabeth Hurley picture, I didn't like where I was. So I wanted to make changes.